So now we can all start. Thank you everybody for making the time to join our second symposium on digital humanism. And this time we'll be discussing whether we should trust AI or whether we should not. And we are aware it's a very clickbaity title, and we will try to bring some nuance into it. And with me today are four excellent experts, and I will introduce each and one of them so you can have an idea who is going to be contributing today. So first, I'd like to introduce Konstantine Arkoudas, who is an experienced AI researcher whose experience lies both in cognitive science, statistical NLP, semantic parsing, and he even has a book on computerized mathematical proofs. And he worked in Bloomberg AI and oversaw NLP teams within Alexa AI and Amazon Search, and now is also a visiting researcher at Kempelen Institute of Intelligent Technologies. Welcome, Konstantine, and thank you for making the time.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.
Secondly, I'd like to introduce Daniela Vacek, who is an AI ethicist at also Kempelen Institute of Intelligent Technologies and Slovak Academy of Sciences. Her expertise lies in responsibility of AI, and she researches both the good and bad and positive and negative implications of artificial intelligent technologies. And she's leading Slovakia's national project on AI ethics and advises UNESCO Commission on Bioethics. Hi, Daniela. Perfect. And then the third speaker that we have today is Simona Stopková, who is a psychologist and head of IPčko Bratislava. For those who do not know, IPčko is an online crisis helpline for young people in Slovakia. They are doing really, really important and much needed work here. And Simona will provide a first-hand experience within the effects of AI on young people. So she will bring a real-world experience of what is happening right now, such as when young people turn to machines instead of people, and why is it in some cases good and why is it in some cases bad. So it's our pleasure to have you here, Simona. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And last but not least, I would like to introduce Freiman, who is a postdoctoral fellow at McMaster University Digital Society Lab. And he even wrote a couple of pieces on trustworthy AI. So I'm really excited to have him here so that he can bring his expertise. And he researches responsible implementation of emerging technologies, and Ori also specializes in trust and technology. So that makes him a really relevant voice in our today's symposium. Welcome, Ori.
Good to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Perfect. So now, with no further ado, we'll just delve right in. Maybe before a few logistical things. So the way the symposium will be sort of run is that we will have this discussion for about, well, say 50, maybe 60 minutes, where I'll be asking a few questions to our speakers, and then I will open this discussion to you guys, so you can ask whatever interests you, either from what kind of emerged during this panel discussion, and also what would you like to ask, because all of these panelists come from different fields, and I think they all might have something that you might want to be interested in. So I will then open this floor for about 30 minutes at the very end, so you can ask, either you can write it in chat, but we would prefer if you could ask this, as we want to simulate this discussion as much as in person as it would be possible. So perfect. So maybe given that we are going to be talking about trust and trustworthy AI, I think in recent years we have seen that there is this kind of proliferation of terms such as safe AI and good AI and harmful AI, and then responsible, reliable, trustworthy, and there are just all of these words that are kind of being used, and they're often being also used interchangeably, and sometimes it's kind of difficult to make sense out of them. And for some, they've just become a buzzwords. Some people just became overnight AI consultants. For some, they're actually quite foundational concepts when we're discussing AI ethics and philosophy. So let me start maybe with a simple question. Maybe I will first ask Konstantine, how do you define trustworthy AI? What is trustworthy AI to you?
Yeah, so I don't think trust is a good choice as a foundational concept or a key idea in AI policy or in AI ethics, or for that matter, as an engineering objective in AI. So think about bias and fairness, for example. So let's say you have an AI model that is used in criminal sentencing, and it turns out to be biased against minorities, and it favors, hypothetically, let's say, white males, for example, right? Now, is that a trustworthy system? I would say that it's perfectly trustworthy for a white male, right? So the issue is that trustworthiness is biased, it's based on the inherently relative and subjective notion of trust, which is a mental state. It's a psychological attitude, and it's one that can very clearly be misplaced. Right? People felt that Bernie Madoff was trustworthy. People thought that the Challenger space shuttle, the one that exploded in the 1980s, that was trustworthy. And obviously, there are many more examples along those lines. So trust is highly relational. It's a three-way relation between an agent, a system, and a purpose. So agent A trusts a system B for a particular purpose C. So we have three moving parts here, right? We have three elements. We have the agent A, the system B, and the purpose C. So one and the same system might or might not be trustworthy depending on who is the agent and what is the purpose. So for some people, a language model might be trustworthy for summarizing, long emails or articles, but maybe not for a medical diagnosis. And other people might feel differently. They might be perfectly comfortable getting medical opinions from ChatGPT. So granted that something being trusted and something being trustworthy are two different things. The first one is a descriptive notion. The second one is normative and depends on whether the system basically deserves to be trusted. But the only way to answer that normative question is to specify a particular purpose and context and particular class of agents and start looking at concrete measurable properties of the system and doing tests. That's what we ought to be focusing on, not whether or not people, feel a certain way in general about the system. And this is, by the way, how it's always been in engineering. When you talk about systems where there's a lot at stake, whether it's a nuclear reactor, or whether you have, control software for an airplane or for medical devices, those fields don't use trust terminology. They don't talk about airplanes being trustworthy. In fact, I was curious. I did a Google search for the phrase trustworthy AI. I got 1.5 million results. And then I searched for trustworthy airplanes. I got 187 results. So this is just not the language that they use in the aviation industry. They don't talk about making people feel good about airplanes and comfortable about flying. They talk about reliability, they talk about safety, they talk about performance, about certification standards, testing regimes, and so on. So, and by the way, once they get those important ingredients right, then trust follows. Trust is the result, is the upshot. So it's important to get the causality right. Trust is an effect, it's not a cause. The important properties that actually cause people to ultimately feel trust are completely objective. These are properties like reliability, accuracy, transparency, correctness, fairness, privacy, and so on. These are the things that AI engineering organizations would be and should be focused on and aiming at. Now, just to wrap things up with just one more minute, if you look at proposed definitions of trustworthy AI by companies like IBM or Meta or by various, consortia or organizations, they are actually conjunctive definitions, right? So they say that an AI system is trustworthy if and only if it has accountability and has transparency and has privacy and safety. So it's just a wish list. And that wish list, by the way, is different from one definition to the next, depending on who you ask. Now, in general, that type of definition where you say that something is X, if and only if it's like Y1 and Y2 and Y3 and Y4, that is just terminology. It's just an abbreviation convention. It doesn't have any analytical power. So it doesn't help to explain anything or kind of give us any insights. It doesn't contribute anything above and beyond Y1 and Y2 and Y3 and so on. And the fact that these definitions all differ from one another, depending on the company, the consortium, the organization, shows that the concept of being trustworthy is not what philosophers call a natural kind. It's just an umbrella concept. It's a bucket, basically, that's more of a marketing buzzword than anything else. It has rhetorical force. It is politically convenient because it kind of signals virtue, but without actually committing to any specific measurable standards. it sounds good and trendy, but it's conceptually confused and shallow, in my opinion, for the reasons I just mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you, Konstantine. And I think to what you just said, I will probably build on Daniela, because in your works, you kind of write a lot about the role responsibility and about the relational aspect of trust and responsibility. So maybe building on what Konstantine just said, how do you define trustworthy AI for yourself?
Yes, absolutely. So I think that making this parallel with responsibility is actually very worthwhile, because I think that we are facing almost exact same issues with the term responsible AI. It's also getting a bit of a buzzword. It's used by companies, by regulations. So we also have this kind of a wish list that contains several elements that actually do not have much with responsibility, that are sometimes even circular, because they sometimes contain responsibility as an item on the wish list. So yeah, that's not very helpful in my opinion. And I think that we as, well, I'm talking for philosophers, I think that we should not resign, we should not give up on the conceptual analysis of this term. So I'm very much into doing this both in case of responsible AI, where I actually did that, and I'm working on doing this in case of trustworthy AI. So my general idea is that I think we should distinguish not two main interpretations of trustworthiness, but actually three. First, on the one hand, we have reliability, of course, which some say that, well, that is not trustworthiness, but sometimes they are kind of used interchangeably, that people actually mean reliability but speak of trustworthiness. So I think that, yeah, we should think of that minimal end of reliability. And on the other hand, on the other extreme, we have genuine human trustworthiness. And then I think that there's a middle layer, which I think is very promising for conceptual analysis. So I think that we should seek something that is more than reliability, but less than this genuine human trustworthiness. Because, well, of course, I mean, this genuine human trustworthiness is not something that can be met by AI systems. So saying that AI systems can be trustworthy in the sense humans can be, that's not gonna happen. But still, I think that, like in the case of responsible AI, there's possibility for this indirect interpretation, which is very popular in case of responsible AI. So instead of saying that these systems are trustworthy, you can talk about human stakeholders, that they are trustworthy, which is a genuine possibility. So yeah, that's it for me.
Yeah, and I think with this, this is, I think, Ori, you wrote a very interesting paper, which has an attention-grabbing headline. It's called "Making Sense of the Conceptual Nonsense of Trustworthy AI." So, and yet there you also distinguish between the mere reliance and the trustworthiness, and you also kind of mentioned that by talking about trustworthy AI, we are sort of shifting the responsibility to the AI systems and not necessarily to the stakeholders. So also, like in relation to what Konstantine and Daniela said, like maybe you can also detail a bit more about what you wrote in the article. Also interesting read. I really recommend for other people to read that. But yeah, how do you define trustworthy AI?
Thanks for the kind words. I absolutely agree with Konstantine and Daniela about what they said. If to add something else that haven't been said before is to say that lay people or us, when we speak with families or when we speak in circles that are non-professional circles, trustworthy is one thing, but when professionals speaks of trust is completely another thing. So when professionals speak of trust, specifically when they measure it, when we look at the scientific domain, there's no unity in what is the object of trust. The tools, the surveys, the experiments, the behavioral data. Scientists measure trust, but they measure so many different things and they call it trust. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that at least people from the viewpoint that I hold, think that in principle, products cannot be trustworthy. They cannot be the object of trust. In order us to have trust, we need the other side, or the trusted side, to have a goodwill, to be accountable for what they promise us, for the expectations that we set, and not to betray us, right? It's an active decision not to. So when I look at my alarm clock, it can't do these kind of things. And by extrapolation, also AI products, but humans, institutions, and corporations can do these kind of things. So that's the addition to this.
Yeah. I remember I was having this conversation with you and Daniela, and I think both of you asked me whether I necessarily like if I trust my microwave or if I find it reliable. And I think this is like the distinction that some of the people should make. Like, who do we trust? Exactly, who do we trust? Like, do we trust things or do we trust people? But yeah, Simona, you also like you come from a bit of a different field, and maybe you can sort of bring closer the idea of like what is trust when it comes to like minors, and also from a psychologist point of view when they use AI systems, and how do you maybe yourself define it in your line of work?
Right. Yes, thank you for the question. I feel like I do come from a very different background, and I have had very different experiences with AI, and they've especially sort of happened over the course of the last year or so, where really we've started to sort of receive contacts from young people where they mentioned AI in some way, but the topics they sort of ranged a lot, right? So the general idea was that essentially AI had sort of taken up these different roles in the lives of young people, whether it was their best friend, their romantic partner, their psychologist, right? And there were also many other topics connected with AI, but we've essentially seen a rise in the last year, and it's been sort of exponential. But what we've sort of found is that we feel like once AI, mostly ChatGPT, is what we've sort of met with. So once, for example, ChatGPT has sort of met the needs of the young people, so they are always sort of use it because they have some very deep human needs. And once those needs have been met, they don't really consider sort of the question of whether it's trustworthy. At least that's what we've sort of observed, that they don't actually really consider this question. They don't really think about it. But when I was talking with my colleagues about what a trustworthy AI system would be in our line of work, they sort of mentioned that ideally we would want it to sort of support the young person or encourage them to sort of find social contacts outside of the AI system. And also because we know that young people, especially this younger generation, they talk about mental health a lot, right? And they talk about it with AI systems. We would want that AI system to sort of, I guess, be able to assess the risk that that young person has, right? Or sort of the risk that they are in. And we would want that system to encourage them to seek actual professional help, right? But I think that is more of a question of reliability rather than trustworthiness from our side.
Yes. Thank you very much for sharing this. Now that we kind of defined what trustworthy AI, at least we've defined it with these for our panelists, what is trustworthy AI to them. Maybe I would like to shift the discussion or like move the discussion a bit further, and specifically to Konstantine, because so I have kind of two questions that emerge from this debate. One is that you worked within Alexa AI and Amazon Search. And I think when we think of these systems, we kind of think of Siri or Alexa as very human-like assistants, and there is this element of anthropomorphizing them, right? And this argument that I've seen in literature over and over again, or like in other discussions, is that when we anthropomorphize AI-based technologies, we often assign them a moral status, right? And when we assign the qualities of moral agents, and then we form relationships with those systems. And it all comes back to trust, because we attribute a moral character to a system that cannot really have a moral character, is incapable of having a moral character. And for those who are not familiar with the term anthropomorphizing, is essentially attributing human qualities and characteristics to an otherwise non-human system or an object. And this is where my question kind of comes in. Like, do you think that when we do that, we sort of risk trusting that the object can be a moral agent, and then we misplace trust in these systems? And then / like my other question to that also kind of encompasses it, is that whether you think that achieving trust should be the main goal when we are developing an AI system, that should be the primary objective. If you put developers into a room and engineers and, I don't know, other software developers, should developing trust be the main thing that we have on the whiteboard when we are developing such systems? You are muted, by the way.
Thanks for the reminder. These are good questions. Let me start with the second one, I guess. So, like I said, I'm not a believer in the conceptual sort of coherence of the notion of trustworthiness. So I don't think that should be a primary engineering objective or a North Star for any system that's in the AI business, whether it's a digital voice assistant like Alexa or Google Voice, or a language model or whatnot. So basically, we need to focus, instead of a kind of high level, horizontal, uber meta property like trustworthiness, we need to focus on very specific, concrete, measurable properties that we can test. Instead of just trusting, right? So example one might be, accuracy and reliability. How well does the system do what it's supposed to be doing? How is it evaluated? On what benchmarks? Using what metrics? And so on. Example number two might be safety. Does it cause any harm? And if so, what types of harm? Under what conditions? At what rates? Perhaps compared to what baselines? Example number three might be privacy, which is huge, particularly, for systems like Alexa, right? What sort of guarantees can the system make about the integrity of people's data? Example number four might be accountability. So what do we know about the people who built the system, about who built the system, and more importantly, how they built the system, right? How was the system deployed? For what purposes it's being used? How well can we audit the system, and so on and so forth? So these are the properties that I would make the priorities for an engineering organization like AI teams in Alexa. So one last remark that I want to make about the risks of focusing on a single kind of uber meta property like trustworthiness is that it's misleading, because it kind of papers over certain painful trade-offs that need to be made between different desirable properties that you want your system to have, many of which, unfortunately, are not independent, right? So there is a clear tension between transparency and privacy, for example. And there are very well documented trade-offs between accuracy and fairness. So even if you take a single individual vertical dimension like fairness, there are many different ways to understand fairness, and there are many different technical definitions of fairness, right? So that by itself is a tricky concept. And there have been well-known mathematical results over the last 10 years, like the impossibility theorem, which basically shows that it's mathematically impossible to satisfy all of these different definitions of fairness at the same time, except for, trivial cases. So again, I come back to the point that a system, an AI system, cannot possibly be universally trustworthy for everyone with respect to every single fairness standard, or in general, in the abstract, because there's always going to be trade-offs. And when we talk about a single absolute notion of trust, we sort of obscure, the fact that unfortunately this is impossible. So so much for the question of what to focus on from an engineering perspective in an organization that is building an AI system. Now, the risks of of basically looking at a system as if it were a human or having human qualities, that angle and the temptation, the urge to sort of ascribe mental and even emotional states to that system. I think that's par for the course. It's something that humans are sort of wired to do. I don't think we can help that. I think that's how we make sense of the world. Even mindless devices like a printer. We ascribe mental states to it. We say, oh, that the printer wants to do this, or it's angry, or whatnot. So I don't think that we can help that. And ultimately, I don't really see a whole lot of very significant issues kind of hinging on that inherent human tendency. I believe the focus again ought to be on specific concrete properties that we want our AI systems to have in certain specific contexts.
Yeah, thank you. I think I agree with most of the things that you said, but I would also be wondering, maybe hearing from an ethicist or philosopher, maybe Daniela, where I know we've had this discussion before, but like, where do you stand on whether trust should be the main objective when developing AI systems? Like, I mean, we heard that multiple times in many of our meetings with developers, etc. And also, like, whether, again, like as Konstantine said, right, that we have many definitions of fairness, and sometimes they stand in contrast. Also, the digital humanism principles, while we have them listed, they often clash, and they cannot be achieved at the same time. So yeah, what is your take on that?
Okay, I would definitely want to stress that in my experience, I've seen developers, companies, and also researchers seeing increasing trust as the unquestioned goal. I've seen that, so I have to say it. So I think that even if we don't like it, I think that for many that is actually one of the goals. So I think we should bear that in mind. But whether it should be the goal, well, I don't think so. I don't think that it should be the unquestioned goal. And maybe we'll see some of the reasons later on when I think Simona might have interesting things to say about that. Because we've seen examples where blind trust in AI systems, so trusting when we shouldn't trust, can have quite damaging consequences. So I think that while in some cases it might be useful to increase trust, like for instance, if there is some medical AI and it really suggests you that you should take someone to seek urgent medical assistance, and you would not trust the system. You would say like, oh, maybe it's wrong, and you wouldn't seek them this medical assistance. Well, that can be quite problematic. But also there are like many cases where having too much trust is really not a good thing.
Yes, and I also think it comes back to the relational aspect of the AI, right? And the roles that different AI systems can have. Like, while you can question whether the outputs of ChatGPT are inherently right, maybe sometimes, again, when you need to triage patients and decide which hospital they should go for cardiac care, maybe this is not the time to necessarily question every single output and just seek the medical care. So it again comes to different nuances and different settings in which AI systems are used. But as Daniela mentioned, I would like to maybe move also to Simona, because I think she has a lot to add. So my question to you would be, again, like, you work at IPčko, so for the people who maybe joined later, it's an online helpline, crisis helpline for young people, and you work with young people who struggle with mental health. And while they might bring mental health issues that are not necessarily or not solely connected to AI systems, many bring up issues that kind of arise from their interactions with different chatbots, or sometimes not even LLMs, but also their interaction with deepfakes and sexualized AI content, etc. So what patterns are you seeing, both positive and negative? Because I think now we can only think of the negative ones, but maybe you can also talk about the positive impact. And where does the question of trust fit into these experiences for you?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, as I've said before, it's sort of been a trend of this year, where we've really seen a rise of contacts, which have sort of been regarding AI. And it's not just our helplines, but also our crisis centers, which we have all over Slovakia, and our youth clubs. So we have sort of different platforms where we interact with young people. And it's been a trend on sort of all of them. And if I had to sum it up, I would say that essentially what we found is that AI has sort of been substituting a lot of empty spaces in the lives of young people. And what we know from sort of our statistics that we publish yearly is that loneliness is the #1 topic that people contact us with, right? And that's shown up at least 2 years in a row, if not 3. And so from our point of view, this is also sort of relating to the rise that we've seen in contexts regarding AI, right? So a lot of the times, young people don't really have anyone to talk to regarding their lives, how they are doing, how they're feeling, right? What's been happening. And in most of their relationships, they feel like they have to sort of fulfill certain expectations, right? Whether it's at work, at school, at home, or in romantic relationships. And then there's AI, right? There's ChatGPT, for example, where it's always available. It never argues. It never questions you. It's just sort of always there for you, and it doesn't really expect anything, right? So it's such an accessible platform, and it's sort of also, you know, at the end of every answer that you get from ChatGPT, there's a question, right? So it sort of seems as if it's showing interest in you, and this is, I think, really what sort of starts these relationships that young people have towards AI. It's this sort of dynamic. And then, you know, it can be sort of, ChatGPT is often considered sort of a friend. But then as in our sort of human relationships, right, oftentimes friendship leads to love, right? And that's also something that we've been seeing, right? So AI in this sort of role of the romantic partner. And from the way that young people talk about it, it really sort of is the same as having an actual relationship with another person, right? So the experience that they have with AI is the same as if they were in love with a real person. And there was this case where we had a client and they were sort of talking to some sort of AI system that was supposed to be discontinued. So it was sort of like a breakup, right? And that client, they really sort of were experiencing this discontinuation of the system as if they were going through a real breakup. That was something really interesting for us. And then the last point I think I want to touch on is AI as a psychologist, right? As I mentioned before, we have a generation of young people who really are sort of open to talking about mental health, which is amazing, right? I think that that's a really, really great thing about this generation. But naturally, as they're forming sort of this new type of relationship with AI systems, they're also talking about their mental health with these systems. And that's where we really sort of see a big problem, because especially because we're a crisis helpline, we also get a lot of contacts from people who are thinking of committing suicide, right? For example. And we've had cases where people have sort of contacted us saying that they consulted this with ChatGPT and ChatGPT told them to contact us, right? Which is the better scenario, but it's not always the case, right? And so what we sort of really find the issue is that you know, AI can't really assess the risk, right? And let's say that you tell AI that you've been having a really, really hard time, you've had a hard day, and you're wondering where the nearest bridges are, right? It's going to give you a list of the nearest bridges. If you write that to our chat helpline, then one of our counselors is sort of going to be very, very attentive to this. And they're going to see that this is somebody who's sort of high risk at this moment. And they're going to, you know, conduct a crisis intervention with them. but this is not something that ChatGPT will do. So this is just one example that we've had before, where we've sort of really been concerned about this growing relationship with AI systems.
Yes, I think this is what is specifically difficult about this, that people, because it is so anthropomorphized, because it feels like you're talking to an actual person. Again, as I was mentioning, and I think it's all four of you were mentioning before, you kind of, because you feel like you're talking to a real person, you're starting to build sort of like a relationship with it. Oftentimes like Claude or ChatGPT remembers things about you, like remembers what you said yesterday and the day before. Like it is tricky. If I was 12-year-old girl, I'm not sure that I would comprehend the fact that I'm not necessarily talking to a friend, because it can, I mean, it is tricky, like sometimes even for me. But again, as you said, like what the humans can do and what these machines cannot do is that the fact that we are catching those little nuances and we're understanding if somebody had a bad day and asks about the highest or tallest bridges, there is some sort of causation happening between this. It's not just a random separated effect. And of course, we can train AI systems to be maybe a bit more sensitive towards these things, but it's always based on probabilities, and it's not necessarily on the same way that humans react. But my question, like a follow-up question to you, is that how difficult it is to maybe like, because you're an intervention center, like do you then, as one of the first steps, do you explain to minors that this is not a human, like you cannot trust it? Do you actually talk with minors about trust and about how it is different? Like, how does it actually work? And I guess like you have different approaches to different age groups, but yeah, just generally for us.
Yeah, sort of. There is sort of I guess a general approach that most of us would take, right? And essentially, because we know that behind that relationship with AI or the usage of AI, there is some sort of need, right, that the AI system is meeting for that young person. We're always sort of looking to name those needs and find sort of alternative ways of meeting them, right? And this is maybe similar to when somebody is self-harming, right? It's a coping strategy. And when we're working with them, what we're doing is sort of finding different coping strategies that they could use in that moment when they would typically want to self-harm. Right. So just as an example, this is what we sort of do, right? So we always try to sort of substitute a negative coping mechanism with a positive one, right? And we're sort of mapping the situation and testing what will work and what maybe is not the best option. And then we're also explaining the risks, right? So that's also sort of a part of it. We're always sort of explaining that even though the sort of AI system seems to communicate empathically, it doesn't actually have empathy and it doesn't actually feel, right? So we're sort of trying to explain the risks, right? And sort of bring that person back to reality, maybe, or sort of stop that anthropomorphization of AI. And then we're finding alternative ways of having those needs met.
Thank you, and also thank you for doing this work, because I think it's really important. I will maybe ask Ori, because I'm not sure if you also involve yourself with minor protection, but again, like I guess there is a difference, right, between the way adults who have developed frontal lobe interact with AI systems and maybe minors who are 12. So maybe building on what Simona said, do you have anything to add, or like where do you see exactly this with minors?
So there's two issues. The first issue is actually whether we want to make trust the end goal of AI development. And here I would completely reject it. I mean, it could be a good target for marketing metric, but not if we want to do other stuff, which I think it was so insightful to hear Simona and previous speakers. I'll add this, that first of all, anthropomorphizing is not necessarily a bad thing. Like kids do it all the time with stuffed animals, and adults do it all the time with cars and bikes that they give them personas, right? And it does become bad when it's about accountability and responsibility of products that tell us what to do. This is where we should draw the line. So also the role of distrust. I think distrust is a good social signal that something isn't working here. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. And when it comes to mental health, so from what I understand, the cutting edge of the technology, and I'm sure it will change and it will get better, and we'll find the right governance mechanism to do these fragile, high stakes systems. But as it is currently, mental health vulnerabilities are not something to experiment with, and by no way exactly, like, just to repeat again what Simona say, I don't like those artificial speakers do not have any capacity for empathy. They do not understand the situation that being discussed. They don't even understand the language, right? It's like a statistical correspondence of words. So absolutely, people involved is a necessary and must.
Thank you. And maybe I'll also give floor to Daniela, because you're also a young mom, a recent mom. So is there any way to maybe, I don't know, how would you, I'm not even sure you know, but how would you approach this when your kid is old enough to maybe interact with these AI systems? And is there any way to protect against this, or is there any way to sort of mitigate it or minimize the harms and the risks? How would you approach it yourself, also as an AI ethicist?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. First, I'd like to follow up a bit on what Simona said. So you mentioned that AI is filling a lot of empty spaces, and I think that it's worth mentioning one quite horrifying data I encountered. It turned out that many young people that contact helpline, they actually don't tell anything to their parents. And when they were questioned about that, like, why don't you ask your parents for help? I mean, they are there. So they are physically there. But what horrified me a lot was that the children explained that they don't want to bother their parents because they are too busy. And I mean, we are me and my husband, we are busy as well. So I think that that's surely one thing I'd like to avoid in the future. That if my child has problem whether with AI or some other technologies, so cyberbullying or whatever, I do really hope and want to make sure that my child knows that I'm never that busy to not have time for that.
Yeah. And I think you kind of like it is a nice bridge to my final question before I open this discussion. And it's about essentially like building this community, that this maybe responsibility lies with all of us, or it's just not like a separate groups in rooms deciding what the threshold is, or maybe it is, I'm not sure. So this is what I actually will be asking you. Konstantine, we've been discussing what trustworthy AI is and what the different like real world problems is. You also mentioned about like how can we, whether fairness can actually be achieved mathematically or not, that there have been proofs that maybe it couldn't. Who do you think should decide the threshold, so the minimum standard of what trustworthy or maybe reliable AI is? And is this something that technologists, users, regulators, ethicists, or some other wider community should do? What do you think of it?
Yeah, so that's a really fundamental question, I think. But before I get to that, if I can just make a brief follow-up on a point that Daniela brought up earlier, which is that people from the AI company themselves say that they want to make people trust their AI technology. So that's true. They might say that, and typically, by the way, in my experience, anyway, it's mostly the marketing people who say things like that because they sound, catchy. The developers less so, but in any event, it doesn't really mean that it has any particular significance or meaning, or that it's the right approach, right? Basically, it's not informative because it doesn't distinguish AI companies from other companies, all of which want people to trust them. I mean, what company doesn't want consumers to have confidence in their products and their services? I mean, food companies want people to trust that their products are not going to poison people, right? Car companies want people to trust that their brakes work. Pharma companies want people to trust that their drugs, their medicine is safe, doesn't have crazy side effects, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I mean, Daniela is certainly right that AI companies might want people to think that their tech is trustworthy, but that doesn't say much, and it doesn't really distinguish AI from any other domain. Now, on the question of who gets to make the very important question of who gets to make sort of regulation and threshold, decisions about what is considered, what AI system is considered to be dependable, trustworthy, whatever you want to call it. I think it has to be a sort of division of labor. It cannot be just tech people for sure, because tech people are not elected, right? I mean, they have no democratic mandate or accountability. So tech people can certainly figure out what is technically feasible or not feasible, and they can come up with benchmarks and tests and metrics, and they can inform the regulators and the general public. But that's where their role ought to end, really. Regulators by themselves cannot do it either, because typically they don't have a good enough understanding of the underlying technologies. And let's face it, regulators generally really like to regulate. So regulators can propose and kind of set minimum standards. But ultimately, based on what they hear from tech people, but ultimately, I think it's primarily the users and the general public that sort of gets to decide, or should get to decide, what is acceptable. And they can do that in a couple of different ways. One way is to express different preferences for one system over the other, which end up sort of exerting market forces within regulation constraints, in the same way that you can't buy a car without brakes or seatbelts, right? Because that's a regulated minimum. But beyond that threshold, you can make different choices as a consumer on what you value, when it comes to safety versus engine horsepower or whatnot. So that ends up sending a clear signal to the car makers, and I think it can be the same sort of calculus with technology companies. And the second thing that the public can do, at least in theory, in practice it's more complicated, is they can elect different governments, which might have very different views on regulation. So some of them might want to have very tight regulations of AI, and others might want to loosen them. And I say in theory because, in practice, once you actually introduce regulations, they tend to become entrenched, and it's very hard to roll them back because of institutional, inertia and so on. But anyway, the short answer is I think you need engagement from multiple stakeholders to make these decisions ultimately.
Thank you. Yeah, I think about the minimum standard, I think sometimes it can be tricky, right? Because we've seen with very large online platforms that sometimes there might be a minimum standard, but the way it is actually when users modify their interfaces, it doesn't necessarily always hold. But yes, I do believe that it should be a common activity between, or the common sort of consensus, a deliberation between multiple groups. Or you also wrote in your papers on especially high-level expert group, and I read a bit of a critical view from your paper and critical voice. Maybe you can either build on that or answer this question, who do you think should decide the threshold?
So I'll tell you this, this, and obviously it wouldn't be a surprise to anyone. The landscape is shifting so fast, and now so many people feel very comfortable to say things to this, whether I have this on my skin, my friend told me this, how should I respond respectfully? And of course, no one in this Zoom meeting, but many people are feeling comfortable to speak with this, right? So at the end of the day, people, and especially young people, to circle back to, do find a listener, if we can call it that way, without judgmental. And sometimes it does reframe the situations or the feelings in a very constructive way. So it does something good at the end of the day. Now, we do need to answer the question, who should make the standards? I think we should think of it as what happens when things don't work well, or what should be the emphasis. And here, there's no disagreement. It's a multi-stakeholder, should involve everyone that can be involved, from regulators to users to those who develop the technology. And of course, it's very hard to make this kind of multi-stakeholders actually work. But I think this is the challenge. We always speak of innovation in technology, and I think that this is the case, that we need to speak of innovation in democracy, in how we take decision on how to govern the technology. And I think this is what I would like to focus. Yeah.
I think the problem is then that the more people you involve, the slower it becomes, and it's gonna, stand in opposition to the fact that like the innovation or like the emerging technologies are moving at a pace that is unprecedented, right? So if we involve everybody, like it's the meeting. The more people you have there, the longer the meeting sometimes is gonna be, and sometimes it's just just people like to talk. So yeah.
So exactly because of that, we need innovation in the democratic process that govern this, because our current processes are very slow, and we need to take everyone, and this is the challenge, take everyone's views meaningfully, but do it fast. And we don't have these processes.
Yeah, sure. And maybe for Daniela to kind of blend both what Konstantine said and what Ori said. So where, maybe not to answer like who do you think should be responsible for this, but like what do you think should be the minimum threshold when we want to talk about trustworthy AI or a reliable or reliant AI?
Absolutely, yes. I think Konstantin and Ori have already covered the question of who should decide on that more than satisfactorily. So I think that I'd like to pursue this question of where this threshold should lie, based on what I said at the beginning about these three interpretations, because I think that we cannot answer this question without considering what notion of trust, at least roughly, we have in mind. So I think that if we talk about reliability, then that's also what was said by Konstantin, that we do have this context dependency here. And I think this is especially true of reliability, because think, for instance, of reliable vacuum cleaner. Say you have some AI robotic vacuum cleaner at your home, and it fails to pick up all the dirt on the floor, and you don't really care that much because, it's not perfect, never mind, it's reliable enough. But if you think of say AI in the context of medical diagnosis, then that wouldn't be good enough. So I think that here we should distinguish high stakes, low stakes cases, and think of reliability in that terms, and seek the threshold accordingly. So I think the threshold, in other words, should be higher for these high stakes AI uses. And then if you think of this in-between layer, so something between reliability and this genuine human trustworthiness, I think we're not there yet with our AI systems. I think that to get there, we need more tailored AI ethics. So I think it should be tailored to the exact domain, and we should be very much clearer on what our normative expectations are on that sort of AI. And finally, I think that in case of this genuine human trustworthiness, I think that's never doable for AI. So we cannot have this trustworthiness, so threshold, no, not happening, never. But even with AGI, I would say. And finally, in that case, if you think of these human stakeholders, I think that is in principle doable. But even there, I think that we need more in case of these normative expectations on the human stakeholders. We need to be clear on them to be able to say that actually these human stakeholders are trustworthy in this proper human sense, because we know that if you think of responsibility and this black box problem, I mean, it's often the case that no one properly knows how the technology is working, how is it making its decisions. It's not always traceable who is responsible for what. So I think that it's massively complicated also if we try to do this indirect analysis and think of trustworthiness of human stakeholders. So yeah, that's my view.
Thank you. And for more of this conceptual analysis, really recommend Daniela's papers. Also a fascinating read if you want to have a Christmas wish list of what to read, recommend. But yeah, so with this, we're actually on time. So thank you very much all for review, for your insights. I think it was fascinating here for me, but also for all of the people in the audience. I think it was really insightful what you said. So I would like to open this to the audience, and I know there was one question in the chat, so I'll just read it out loud. We can start with this one, and then whoever wants to ask, then I also encourage you to just unmute yourself and ask that question, so it can be more personal. So I will just ask the question: if we aim to build a trustworthy AI, how can we justify pursuing AGI and claim to keep it on a leash? Maybe Konstantine could answer that. I'm not sure, Milan, who this question was aimed for, but yeah, I'll just maybe ask this to Konstantine.
Sure. Yeah, I guess that goes back to the anthropomorphic question or cluster of issues. I think there tends to be a sort of assumption that even when we build AGI, it's not just going to be intelligent in general, but it's going to have the general characteristics of a human being. So it's going to have desires and beliefs and intentions, and it's going to be an autonomous sort of agent, and it's going to want to procreate itself and make sure that it's never unplugged. And so on. And that's where I think a lot of the concerns and a lot of the anxiety about AGI and then potentially ASI after AGI derive from. But I think that tendency is not really well founded, because for the same reason that you have airplanes, right, that fly high up in the sky, so they're very much like birds. But that doesn't mean that they behave like eagles, that suddenly, they see prey on the ground and they kind of swoop down and want to pick it up and eat it. It's just a machine, right? It just does what it's supposed to be doing. And it's going to be the same thing with AGI. I think even if it has general intelligence in the sense of being very capable of, let's say, reasoning or whatever cognitive dimension you want to choose, it's not going to have genuine mental state. It's not going to have qualia. It's not going to want to exist and procreate. It's not going to be like humans, right? So I don't see really any kind of Terminator or Judgment Day scenarios flowing from achieving AGI.
Thank you.
Even when we get to it, by the way, which for what it's worth, in my own humble technical opinion, I think that LLM-based technology is not likely to attain AGI anytime in the near future, certainly. So that's a whole other topic of discussion.
And maybe for people, because I think maybe we have people in the audience who don't necessarily work with AI systems on an everyday basis. So if you could explain what AGI is, or how do you see it? So
sure. Yeah. So it stands for general artificial general intelligence, and then ASI, for what it's worth, stands for artificial super intelligence. But you can say, and it's, by the way, the exact definition of these terms is controversial. Nobody really knows how to. There is no widely agreed upon way of defining either AGI or ASI, but probably the least controversial way to define it would be to say that an AGI system is one that can be, from a behavioral perspective, as intelligent as any human being, right, on any given cognitive task. So pick any intellectual task, and I'm just saying cognitive and intellectual because AGI doesn't necessarily need to be physically situated in the real world and kind of navigate space and time. It can be just a Linux process running on a server in a data center in Virginia, right? It doesn't need to be picking things up and stacking things and so on. It can be completely disembodied. So a purely intellectual task, purely cognitive, just make your choice, pick any such task. It should be able to accomplish that task at least as effectively as any human can. That's probably the least controversial way to define AGI.
Thank you. I also see a raised hand from Katarina, so please feel free.
Okay, I have a question, and I have my video maybe on. I don't know.
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay. So I have a question more for all of you, but it is a question maybe followed by what Simona said about the filling up the empty spaces for young people. Many times people think, or especially developers, but also lay people, that technology will solve our problems, our human problems, right? And the problem of loneliness is like widespread problem, not necessarily related to artificial systems, but in general in nowadays society, especially after coronavirus and pandemic, etc., like the loneliness and social isolation is present. And there were published a lot of papers that show that actually when people are starting to communicating with ChatGPT, their loneliness worsen, and it will lead to like more social isolation. So what I wanted to ask you is that, okay, it will maybe fill up the empty place, but it is just for some time. It is not like a long-term solution. So I want to ask you if you agree with it, and also if you think potentially that it will lead to maybe degrading human skills. Because many times when people think or thinking about the interaction with other human beings, they just think about language, but there is also non-verbal behavior. So for example, imagine that some child goes to you and you can see that he is distressed, right, by some kind of non-verbal behavior, but large language models cannot do that. So what if some young man or even woman can say, why would I even try to make friends with people when ChatGPT is better? Or why would I even ask my mom some question because it is easier to ask chatbot some questions, etc. So do you think that it will decrease our social skills? I'm not saying just you can answer, all of you can, but it is just what I was thinking about, that it is worsening our loneliness, social isolation, and it is not solution to our problems that are present in society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really a great question. And I have 2 points that I thought of. One of them was, as you said earlier, essentially, we've been talking about this idea of sort of AI filling these empty spaces. And I think when it becomes problematic is sort of when it's the only substitute for those empty spaces, right? So when it's sort of in the role of the parent, the friend, the romantic partner, the psychologist, right? So when AI becomes the only substitute for those empty spaces in that person's life, and it doesn't just have to be a young person, right? I think that's when we have an issue, right? And then your question about sort of the deterioration of social skills, I think that one important point to make is that when I was describing young people's interactions with AI, I mentioned that they often bring up that it doesn't argue, it doesn't protest, right? It never expects anything, it agrees with you, and so on. And I feel like that doesn't necessarily mirror everyday interactions with people, right? And also that interactions where you have to argue, you have to set your boundaries, you are questioned, right, are very important for a young person's development. And so when you have an AI system that only agrees, never questions, never argues, doesn't expect anything, then that's not really sort of teaching young people the skills that they need in real life. Right? So I think in that sense, it could sort of deteriorate social skills, but also other skills, possibly. But if anyone wants to add anything, that would be great.
Yeah, maybe I can add one issue. I think that it would be very helpful, because I think that these systems can be good solutions short term, but very short term. So if you urgently really need to talk to someone and have absolutely no one you can confide in, or you feel like that you have absolutely no one that you can confide in, then it can be a short-term help. But as soon as you use it long-term, that's not gonna have good consequences. And I think that it's vital to kind of change the goal of these chatbots. I know that it's a bit anti-business oriented idea, but I think that it would be very helpful for those people to, instead of trying to keep the person in the chat, to motivate the person to go outside of the chat, to give ideas how to find real life connections with people, to support the person in reaching out, in talking to actual people that are around them. So I think that instead of just isolating the person more and more in the chat, I think that what's really needed from these chatbots is to also motivate those people to switch it off at times and seek these real, genuine human connections and form these relationships.
Yes, I will maybe.
Yeah, to maybe go for it.
Just
I'll
one short. Just may I or?
Yeah. I just wanted to add to
Okay,
the
great.
discussion that
Just-
actually what we go go for it. And I will just add. I would just, because I was trying to add to what Simona and Daniela said, that actually like what we see from empirical research with TikTok or other platforms is that, as well with minors particularly, is that they will not override the default settings. So the point is that if the default setting is that you have no sort of incentive to exit a conversation, or if there is endless scrolling, like it depends if we're talking about LLMs or about like very large online platforms. But the point is that there should be some sort of responsibility of these developers or the companies to kind of distinguish between who is using that. Again, like coming back to what all four of you basically said during the conversation, is that it was relational, it's context dependent. But the point is that we cannot expect a 12-year-old kid to overwrite the basically prompt of the ChatGPT and say, oh, by the way, don't always agree with me, or by the way, don't always support me. Like, try to set your own boundaries so that I can. I mean, it's an unreasonable expectation to have. So the point is that we need to sort of have different standards for different uses, and we cannot expect kids to sort of set their own default settings to the way it's going to be beneficial to them, because it won't. So yeah, go for it.
That is actually one what I wanted to say in a question, that one of the solutions would be to not design anthropomorphic artificial systems in the first place, because in a recent paper this year it was published, it was shown how anthropomorphic design is intentional by the companies, because it helps by user engagement to create more human-like artificial systems and chatbots. So maybe one of the solutions would be to consider, especially as Sára said, that children and minors cannot distinguish between really just maybe artificial system and a real human being or a real human interaction. So maybe even consider if we really need to, I know it's also anti-business-like, but really need to, that maybe user engagement is not everything in the end.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a food for thought. Thank you very much, Katka, for bringing this. I think there's a question. I don't see any raised hands, so I'll just read out loud what was written here. So, oh no, okay. She just has to leave. Thank you very much for joining, Iris. Is there Anybody else who would like to ask anything, I really encourage you, because we have around 16 minutes left, and you have all these people here ready to take your questions. So, you go for it.
Yeah. Thank you. I've got some issues with my camera, so it will be turned off. Sorry for that. I would like to go back to the point when the discussion has started, or when all this panel has started, about the concept of trustworthy AI, and how we maybe are trying somehow to clarify the concept, understand it better, to discern between the reliability of artifacts and machines and the trustworthiness of, for example, people, organization, and to sometimes we misplaced our trust into something that maybe it's cannot earn our trust because it cannot meet some conditions on trustworthiness. And I'm thinking, how can it maybe change this discussion if we are working with other concept of trustworthy AI, or in general of AI, like this socio-technical concept of AI, when we are not talking only about the machine and the data and the algorithms, but we are also talking about the people who are part of this concept of AI as a socio-technical complex, people who are developing and testing and annotating data and so on. And my question is, if we will adopt and if we'll work with this such richer concept of AI and trustworthy AI, does it mean that it is only, we are only saying in a different words that we are still talking about the people who should earn our trust, or organizations? So we are collapsing the original concept into something we already have, the entities like the organizations and other people who can earn our trust? Or are we talking about some new kind of the entity or the concept, which is kind of the hybrid between, and it consists of some different layers between the machine and the people?
Thank you. Maybe Ori, you can take that.
Yeah, with pleasure. Thanks a lot. It's a good question. At the end of the day, regulators or those who make the regulations or technologists, at the end of the day, society have decided we'll use the term trustworthy AI. So let's flow with that. Now let's try to put something meaningful in that concept. And it's exactly as you pointed out. Maybe it should be some kind of a reduction from the product to those who are in charge of the product and the regulators who are in charge of regulating the product. So circling back and to close the answer, we do have something like the EU AI Act, Article 50, that demands transparency duties from the artificial speaker to let know the person who hears it that they're not speaking with a human. So it's a good beginning. I'm not saying it's perfect, but when everyone is involved, we can think of a trustworthy system as a whole that includes also regulations, also products, and also, of course, us people.
Is there anybody else who would like to add to or build up on Ori, what he said? Yeah.
I can.
Okay.
Should I?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting conceptual question, whether it's like this pure human trustworthiness once again, so not really discovering some new form of trustworthiness or some new form of trustworthiness. And I think it really depends on two issues. One is whether the AI system as such is part of this whole group that is being considered trustworthy. And another thing is what's your view on groups? So whether groups are genuinely new object rather than the collection of these entities. So I think that it really boils down to these two answers, because if you really have just a collection of humans and we have relations of trust and we have trustworthiness of these people, then I'd say that it's nothing new conceptually. But if we manage to defend this idea that the AI system is part of the group, then I think we would really have something new. But we would also have something new in case one would conceptually or ontologically distinguish between the collection of individuals that forms the group and the group as a new object. So I think that that would be my very philosophical and theoretical answer to that. But I think that with the first option, where the AI system is included, I think we would face some issues similar to responsibility. So, for instance, Huckley and Makela, they argued that if you cannot have individual moral responsibility of AI system, then you cannot have collective responsibility of a system that includes AI system. That wouldn't go argumentatively true. And I think we might face similar issues in case of trustworthiness.
Interesting, thank you. Is there any other question from the audience? Going once, going twice. Okay, well, in case there are none, so I would like to thank all of you for coming. I hope that it brought some new insights and some new thoughts to think about when you are both like interacting with the AI systems or the people close to you, or generally if you're working with AI systems and with terms like trustworthy AI, responsible AI, safe AI, etc., etc. So thank you very much also to the speakers for finding the time in your busy schedules also before Christmas. I know it's a busy time for everybody. So thanks a lot to Daniela, Ori, Simona, and Konstantine. I'm sure if any of you have questions, feel free to maybe contact them, and then you can discuss other things individually. And we will be continuing the symposia in the next year as well. There are 2 remaining symposia that we'll organize on topics that are yet to be determined, but one will be in person and one will be online, a similar structure, maybe for an hour and a half. And for more information, you can just follow us on LinkedIn with Kempelen Institute of Intelligent Technologies, or EUTHIT, similar to where it was posted. So again, thank you very much, everybody, and I hope you will have a nice week, and also Merry Christmas, or Shabbat Shalom or Happy Hanukkah to everybody, or other holidays that people celebrating. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.